sorry. Good afternoon. My name is Marisa Pierce, and I am your presenter for this afternoon. I come from Dallas College, and I am the Associate Vice Chancellor of Enrollment Management. It's my pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. We have about 30 minutes in which I will give a condensed presentation on strategic enrollment management. I'll also refer to it as SEM, and adult learners. So before I begin, I want to make sure that I celebrate our mothers very quickly. Those of you who are mothers or are in a role similar to a mother, whatever that may be, I wish you a very happy Mother's Day and an upcoming happy Mother's Day weekend. So congratulations to all of you as we move into this lovely weekend. And for all of our colleges that are with us this afternoon, congratulations to all your graduates that will be coming through our stages sometime during the course of the month. I'd like to begin today by sharing with you a couple of things that we will do as a result of this presentation over the next few minutes. The intent of this presentation is really to be able to give all of you a very brief sense of how to apply SEM, its concepts, strategies, and planning mechanisms as it relates to specific populations. In this case, we're going to be more mindful of adult learners. Now, in some elements of my discussion, you might see some things that are relevant to some of our younger adults, but nonetheless, the focal point of this conversation will be adults. I also would like to take some time to identify and characterize our adult learners, as well as giving you an example that is close to my heart and our practice from Dallas College as to how to enroll and support adult learners, broadly speaking. Now, when I get to that point and I share that example with you all, those elements are a broader conversation in and of themselves. So just be mindful of the fact that I may go through that at lightning bolt speed, but you're also all welcome to contact me at any point so I can speak to it more broadly at a later time and day. All right, so let's get started. I start first and foremost with sharing with you all that, as you all know, we have a new enrollment imperative. The new enrollment imperative really speaks to the fact that our world has changed. We know very much that what we've experienced in the last few years has really called for us to be able to be flexible and adaptable to a new higher education landscape. All that to say that in the higher education landscape that we face today, we have suffered major declines across the board. And in particular, those major declines have influenced and perhaps been more pertinent and more present in our adult students and our adult learners. The good news is as of this spring, there has been a strong indication that declines are that the trends are reversing themselves, right? We're seeing a reverse, we're seeing the behaviors start to pivot in a direction in which we're seeing greater hope of our students coming back. In front of you are some data points that were retrieved from the National Clearinghouse. And again, while it speaks to some of our younger populations, it also speaks to where we've seen the most potential growth, particularly on the academic side of the house, as it relates to our workforce certificates, and as well as our particular ethnic groups and how well they're doing, or some decreases in some areas, particularly with our women. So that gives us a sense of where we need to have a greater focus if we're not already doing that, okay? Some extended good news, again, as it relates to the reversal of behavior and the reversal of enrollment trends, is that we're seeing, as it relates to these last few months, and it's not the same everywhere, but we're seeing large indications of this change, that as you see in front of you, 44% of students of our adult students are considering that are not currently enrolled are considering re-enrolling. Students that have stopped out, another important group that we work with very diligently, are also considering re-enrolling. And 51% of our Black and multiracial students are considering enrolling or re-enrolling, as well as 44% of Hispanic students. That comes to us most recently from the State of Higher Education presentation and updates. As an overview, just to expand on this, Our colleagues over at AACC, the American Association for Community Colleges, give us a fast facts, a document in which what I've done for you here today is I've created a snippet of those areas that we tend to look at in terms of demographics more often than not. This basically speaks to what we are trying to achieve as we work with our adult learners. If you note, more importantly here, out of all of this, is the average age that we're seeing within this national landscape or snapshot. The average age as it relates to this document and these sources, this is coming from AACC's dashboard, also derived from our national our National Center for Education Statistics, is telling us that our average age of students is 27. So 27 tells us that, yet again, we are focusing on predominantly our adult students. That's where the greatest need resides. We also know that we have to be mindful that our adult students categorically represent many different types and many different categories of students. If you see on the slide before you, you'll note that I have identified first-generation students, single parents, non-US students, veterans. In this case, which not necessarily applicable in its totality, but students with prior bachelor's degrees might have a need to go through a real reskilling process. I did say reskilling process. Because they're changing careers, or perhaps they've lost a career in what we've just gone through. I won't read the rest of the demographics. I know that you all can see them. If you have any questions, we can follow up on that shortly. By definition, I want everybody to be mindful of the fact that strategic enrollment management differs from institution to institution, because each one of us has our ways of approaching our overarching strategic goals for our colleges and our overarching goals and objectives within our divisions of student services or student success. So for the purposes today, I share with you a comprehensive enrollment management definition. What I want you to take away from this definition is, at the end of the day, it is speaking to that SEM is a concept, but more importantly, it is a process that calls for collaboration and calls for intentionality. And what I mean by that is, when we look at the ecosystem, which I'll talk a little bit more about in just a few minutes, that intentionality and collaboration is what really drives SEM to align with our strategic enrollment, with our strategic college plans overall. When we talk about SEM, we're talking about increasing participation through recruitment, retention, and leading to completion. Also, what I want you to be mindful of is, as we're working with our students, and particularly our adult learners, this is about a student continuum. We must break away from the notion of enrollment being at that front end of the funnel. What do I mean by that? Enrollment management only being exclusive to admissions, financial aid, advising. It's so much more than that. Many of us already know that, but the question is, do we put it into practice? And that's why strategic enrollment management, by definition in and of itself, is a tool we must begin to implement, if we're not already implementing it, being more mindful of how we can bring people together for the betterment of the service to our students. As I mentioned earlier, in terms of strategic enrollment management, I'll say SEM because it's a little bit easier. There are key components to SEM. We have to move forward with a purpose. That incorporation of a purpose really calls to, what are we doing holistically? What are our overall objectives? What are our overall strategies? What are our tactics? Who's responsible for really bringing everything together? What does that timeline look like? And more importantly, how are we getting to this point? In those holistic approaches, we need to be mindful of who needs to be at the table. If you know, part of this particular slide speaks to all-encompassing. We must be mindful of the fact that there is a cross-functionality that needs to be thought of here in terms of being able to best serve students. So it's not just student success or student services and academics and workforce. It's also marketing. It is also IT, it's IR, and all other core departments across the institution. Even so, with additional importance is our finance team, because they allow us to inform that process overall and how we are going to continue to increase enrollment for the purposes of increasing our revenue so that we can in turn have resources to better support our students. Again, at the end of the day, this speaks to collaboration by multiple units, as I've already expressed and explained. The ecosystem of strategic enrollment management really calls for, at the core, these four particular components. I indicated already that collaboration is a core part of what we must do, but communication also is very meaningful in layers. Communication cannot start at the top and fail to communicate all the way through to the bottom. It's a two-way process. We need to be in constant communication throughout our strategic enrollment planning, enrollment management planning, so that everybody is aware of what everybody else is doing to better serve our students and to better serve one another and be clear on what it is that we're trying to achieve. Efficient systems and processes, we have to be mindful of the fact that our processes must be streamlined, must be in the business of removing barriers to better support our students, particularly those who are in greatest need. We're always going to have students who come through our doors and are ready to do what they need to do. But more often than not, particularly our adult learners are going to come through our doors and they're going to feel a bit displaced, a bit disconnected, because either they've been gone for a long period of time or they just don't feel a sense of belonging because this is different from them. This is where our marketing, research and awareness comes into play, being mindful of what our branding is speaking to, being mindful of how we're making connections with particular types of students. I'll talk a little bit more about that as it relates to adult learners. Recruitment networks have to be trained to be able to communicate with our adult learners. I'll speak a little bit about one of the strategies that we've employed, that I've employed within my team, to further expand how they can best reach adult learners. As we go through these processes, these elements are not unfamiliar to anybody who is listening right now. Again, when I speak about the student continuum, all of us are aware or should be aware of, to some degree, of our lost momentum stages in a student's journey, that it starts when we connect and it ends when we complete. And in the community college's case, completion can mean a lot of different things. As everyone knows, completion can mean that you have finished a credential. That may be a certificate or an associate's degree, and you've gone directly into the workforce, or you have completed a credential or an associate's degree and decided to continue your studies in a university setting. But all this presumes that we have given you the tools and the skill set to be able to build on that credentialing. Let me also be mindful of the fact that we also know that a connection can mean micro-credentials, and I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the second part of this presentation as it relates to particularly connecting adult learners. Everything that we do must be with an equity-mindedness approach. We realize that, that there are some things that we must do to ensure that everybody is receiving the same resources, that has the same opportunity to be successful. But again, in particular populations, we are creating the sense of belonging, the culture of care that is really being, again, I'll use the word intentional, of the population that we are serving. You would not have a same dynamic or a same level of engagement with an 18-year-old that you would have with an adult learner. There's different levels of learning that occur there, and I'll talk a little bit about theory that can be employed as it relates to serving those different types of populations. Right. And I'm trying to kind of keep my dialogue tempered so I'm not going too fast. All right, when we're considering adult learners, let's shift gears a little bit. I just gave you a really quick overview of SEM and how to think about it as an ecosystem if you're not already doing that, and how to be mindful of the things that need to be in place and what that means for each and every one of us as an institution. But when we think about our adult learners, we understand that our adult learners have a series of barriers that they must overcome. Many of them some of them are listed here. There may be many more that we have not been more deeply aware of, but at the core, these are key: time, help, resources, and understanding, having clarity and awareness of how they need to go about engaging our colleges and how we need to go about engaging them. For greater context, I've shared with you some of the key data elements or key implications for what happens in each and every one of these barriers. I'll use the first example: not enough time available. 50% work full-time and 2/3 are responsible for childcare. And what we've also included in this particular slide is some of the high impact strategies, broadly speaking, that could be done to best support our adult learners. But let me talk a little bit more about what that also really looks like. It calls upon us to really understand by type, what each one of our student populations is going through. So broadly speaking, adult learners have challenges of time, they have challenges of commitment, and they have challenges that they are uncertain about whether or not, again, the sense of belonging is for them, because it is very different. So if we are working with, for example, GED students, that's a great example of students that could be in between being a young adult and being an adult or an older adult, and that has a range of ages that we could be working with. But let's think about this very, very carefully. And I'll use GED as an example. Single parents is another great example. But one of the practices that I have employed in the past is understanding that our GED students, yet again, have had life experiences that have required for them to step away from their traditional educational journey. And because they've been required to step away from that journey, we do them a disservice if we are approaching a GED student in an informational session the same way we'd approach a student that's straight out of high school. I learned that the hard way several years ago when I was working as an executive director of recruitment and outreach, when it occurred to me that my recruiters were having conversations with GED students in the same way that they were having conversations with recent graduates. Those are two very distinct populations that require very distinct support systems, simply because we need to understand how we can have our GED students make a connection that makes them feel, again, like they're part of something more. The students went after a GED because it was a last resource, because life got in the way. That also tells me that those students had to step away because there might have been life commitments that were requiring for them to stay away. And additionally, we had to employ training to get our recruiters to understand, please look at it from the lens of empathy and seeing that behind that particular face, there's a story. And the story is very different from, again, that of a high school student. That the same dynamic for a high school student does not resonate for a GED student. So I'm sharing that with you all because while some of you that are listening may know this already, I think what's important too is that we are mindful, and when we're connecting with our students, that our recruitment staff, our college coaches, as we call them here in Dallas, are mindful of how to approach these different populations. The same holds true for single parents. Single parents have the same dynamic where all of those same elements are a part of their life, and you cannot expect them to have the same engagement as you would a younger adult. So again, a strategy, broadly speaking, broad strokes, is to work with our recruitment teams and understand and give them the training for that differentiation and serving those populations. All right. I'm watching my time. So overall impacts in terms of high impact strategies, as we talk about, our adult learners, and I've already alluded to some of these things. When you are looking at streamlining processes, it's an imperative to remove barriers. And I'm going to tell you a short story that personalizes this. and we're going to call the gentleman's name, we're going to call him Mr. Smith. I'm trying to do this in about 3 minutes. I recently got on a phone call with Mr. Smith, and as an ABC of enrollment management, you know that if a phone call reaches the desk at these levels, and I'm not about titles, don't get me wrong, but you know, when they reach a phone call at this level or beyond, there's a problem. And so Mr. Smith was an individual that, bless his heart, you know, when he got to me, he was very kind, very patient, but at his wit's end because he was anxious about the fact that he felt like our teams, while trying to do their jobs, were rushing him through the process just to get him in. And he never complained per se about our students, because he said these people are trying to do what they, you know, your team is trying to do what they think is best, but what they're not understanding is that I've been around for a long time. I've been a person who's worked in industry, who's been in and out of jobs, who's barely survived, who's had a lot of different needs. And I just need for somebody to take a moment to hear me out and understand me, because this is overwhelming for me. And so that, and I'm cutting it short, and there was much more to that conversation, because this comes back to being leaders and or followers that are highly empathetic. And I realize that our jobs have a lot of demands that don't allow us to spend too much time, but just a few more minutes of listening to this individual is all that he needed. And it appeared at that time that our staff that were helping him didn't stop to understand that. All he wanted was a human connection. And adult learners thrive on that because that's what they're used to. Generationally, think about this, and it's anecdotal somewhat from Marisa's experience sharing with you, but it's just the truth. You know, generationally, some of us really bond and feel more engaged and feel more connected with, you know, human to human interaction. And there are some young adults and even older adults that are perfectly fine with, you know, social media and engaging those platforms. But let's be honest, there's a difference between those of us who engage Facebook these days and those of us who engage TikTok, my point. So I hope some of you are laughing about that. It's true, but it's also kind of funny. So all that to say, you know, that we have to be mindful of the things that we are doing in terms of our enrollment models, how we're staging them, how we're being responsible about creating that culture of care, but it is intentional and equitable specifically to a core population that is an adult learner, right? I won't continue to read the rest of these elements because it's fairly clear what we're talking about in terms of, you know, structural policies and practice barriers, where we try to simplify the process as best as we possibly can to assist our adult learners to come back into a world that they have either long gone been detached from, or they're barely coming in for the first time. So what does that look like? We have to ask ourselves that question. All right. Once they're here, once they're in our environment and they've been welcomed in and they've gone through the process, the other thing that we must be intentional about doing, and this holds true for all of our students, is making sure they're receiving that case management approach time and time again. They also need it, and they perhaps need it even more to ensure that they stay focused and they have the resources that they need to be successful, because their opportunity costs and the competing demands that they have, you know, outweigh a lot of things that may cause them to make decisions to yet again break away from college. So what do we do to better support that? You know, how do we respond to the adult learner that's having to manage life? And life could mean a lot of different things. I mean, there could be multiple elements in their life that they're managing. There could be life crises that they're managing. Nowadays, we have been greatly focused on basic needs and student wellness. And how do we keep those things front of mind for all of our students? But again, how do we raise the bar to make sure that our adult learners, which is the largest constituency that we have, you know, has that reinforced support that they need? Again, not to dismiss the value of our other students and their needs, but competing priorities do make a difference, and we need to understand that. All right. The time goes by very quickly. So everyone on screen understands that not only is it important to have internal practices, policies, and activities aligned and shaped in a way that we understand how we're best going to serve our students, but the other side of this is also understanding externally, what are we doing on the outside to connect with our students? What are we doing to build relationships? These relationships can be directly connected to employers. They can be directly connected to school districts. They can be directly connected to community service centers. This is where we work together with our workforce development areas and understand the labor market needs that are out there and how can we best make the connection of labor market needs and the job opportunities that are available that can be created maybe by obtaining a credential in a shorter period of time. You've utilized some flexibility in a shorter period of time. You've expended less money or no money at all, depending on if the grant's available, to get our adult learners out into a job that is going to pay them a high living wage and allow them to move forward, but also retain that connection that speaks to, you started right here, you're doing great. How about we keep going? And how do we make those connections to get them to take the next step to the next credential or connect them by a transfer element to the next institution and have them get even better at what they're doing? And so that's the impact of coming together and working with partnerships. Each one of these high impact strategies, why do I break them down this way? Because there's so much more we can discuss. Come as part of your planning in a strategic enrollment management action plan. But it is up to each institution to determine what that looks like. Okay, I'm almost done here. From a broad perspective, the slide in front of you represents the Dallas College's learning care model. This is essentially a summary by visual of what Dallas College created to help support all of our students. But what you see here resonates with everything I just spoke to based on this learner care model. It's the collaboration, it's the communication, it's the marketing elements, the partnerships that have been available so we can best support our students. Now I realize that there's high school partnerships down here and at least my left-hand corner. And that can be relevant, but that's a whole other discussion. And so is this whole learner care model discussion that I'm happy to talk offline to anybody about at a later date or a later time. But I just kind of wanted to give you a visual of how it can look when you bring it all together and how this resonates with serving our student populations where they are and where we need to meet them at. Okay, now ultimately the goal is, and this is where I come back and kind of wrap it up a little bit, I have one more slide after this. We're looking to be able to get our adult learners on their feet, out in the field in a shorter time frame, which is greater for them based on those competing priorities, right? And external factors that they have not been able to control and they're still trying to recover from. We want to be able to offer them those opportunities that allow them to build over time on credentials that will continue to lead them to greater opportunities. And so this is a snapshot of the different timeframes that we at Dallas College have put together and offer for our students as they're coming through our door, and we promote by way of academics and workforce development, but we also make sure to the best of our ability that our recruiters are being highly mindful of staging this dialogue and staging the dialogue so individuals know that there's an opportunity to fast track a career or to grow in a career. Okay. Now, last slide. Overall, strategic enrollment management and any kind of learner, but in particular adult learners, look at it from a three-pronged approach. And I'll be specific here with theory. We must collect the important data. I'm preaching to the choir of all of you as it relates to what needs to be understood. Understand the communities that we serve. There are some examples of the things that we need to look at, and we need to be really digging deep into the data. We all hear that very often. We would do well to perhaps at the right occasion employ theory. Think of and be mindful of, and get about 30 more seconds, the theory of andragogy. How do adult learners learn? What are they looking for? What do they bring? Make sure our recruiters know these things, and we'll get across a little bit more deeply. In practice, I've shared with you our institutional example, but I also employ you to have a creative approach and a partnership imperative to make sure that our adult learners are braced for success through all the support we can give them. I thank you all for letting me join you this afternoon.
Thank you, Dr. Pierce. Yeah, so we're going to be closing out the room so we can go to our closing session.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Bye-bye.